Welcome to this new session of infraWizard tutorial series. In the last few sessions, you learned about creating new networks by importing data from different sources in different formats. Now, let's learn about using the Manage Networks panel to manage the settings of the pipe networks in our project. Using this panel, you can create a new empty network by clicking this Add New button here. In this dialog, you should basically define the network name and type, which can be gravity or pressure. In the Styles panel, you can select the plan style and the profile style to be assigned to the network. The plan style controls the appearance of the network in plan view and the annotations of pipes and nodes. The profile style you select here becomes the default style that is applied when you create a new longitudinal profile in this network. However, you can still assign a different style while you're creating the profile, or even change it after you create it. This makes it possible to apply different profile styles to the longitudinal profiles in the same network. Then we come to the ground surfaces. You'll see this panel only if you're using infraWizard on Autodesk Civil 3D. infraWizard asks you to select a primary surface and a secondary surface to be associated with the network. Assigning surfaces to the network is optional. You can still select None if you don't like to use this feature. However, assigning these surfaces makes it much easier to pick the ground levels of the nodes and to plot the ground line on longitudinal profiles. I'll show you shortly how to do this. I usually assign the finished ground surface as a primary surface and the existing ground surface as a secondary surface. We have one more button here called More Settings. It contains the backdrop settings, which are available only for gravity networks. infraWizard uses these settings to evaluate the backdrop connections to manholes. We'll come back to this in a while. Click OK. Now I got my new network called SS shown here. I should click OK here as well to have whatever I did in the Manage Networks panel applied to the project. Now I can add new pipes to the network SS by converting a couple of polylines, for example. Select My Network, and here we go. Back to Manage Networks. I can use this button to rename my network. And I can delete the network if I want to remove it completely from the project. Here, you can also modify the properties of the network while working on the project. The display column lets you select which networks are visible and which are hidden. I can uncheck some of the networks to hide them. You'll notice that the longitudinal profiles are always displayed for all networks because this helps in tracing the interference issues. If you want to turn all the networks on or off, you can right-click the column header and select Turn All On or Turn All Off. You can also select some of the networks to change their display status in one go. Same thing can be done with the plan style and profile style properties. You can change the style for one network or change it for multiple networks together. For example, I'll change the plan style of these three networks to Complete Gravity. Once I click OK, all the changes are applied. I'll do the same thing here to set the surface called Finished Ground as the primary surface for all networks, and surface Existing Ground as the secondary surface. Let's take a moment to see how to make use of these surfaces. As soon as you assign surfaces to a network, infraWizard automatically picks the ground level at each node from these surfaces and stores it in the node properties. Now, if I open any node, you'll see that there are three options for the ground level source. The first one is Set Value, which was imported with the network or entered manually. The second and third options are the values picked from the primary and secondary surfaces we assigned. I'll choose the primary surface here to tell infraWizard that the ground level of this node should always refer to the primary surface of the network. If I move this node now, you'll notice that the ground level of it is updated with the surface level at the new position. In case you move the node accidentally outside the surface boundary, infraWizard will automatically refer back to the set value of the ground level. The only case you need to use the command update ground is when you make an edit to the definition of the surface itself, because such edits cannot be detected by infraWizard. For example, if I raise this surface by 1 meter, you'll notice that the ground levels are not automatically modified. Click Update Ground. Now it's all right. Using surfaces and longitudinal profiles is surprisingly easy. All you need to do is to select the network surface as the source of ground line plot. Here, I'm selecting primary surface as a source of the design ground line, and the secondary surface as the source of existing ground line. And this is what you get. Finally, let's talk about the backdrop settings. Every gravity network has an independent set of backdrop settings which you define through this dialog. infraWizard will use these settings or criteria to evaluate every single connection between a pipe and a node in the network. Depending on this evaluation, infraWizard will define each connection as a connection with no backdrop, a ramp backdrop, or a vertical backdrop. A backdrop connection is technically required when the fall height between the inlet pipe and the outlet pipe of a manhole exceeds a certain value. Ramp backdrops are used for the relatively small drops, while the vertical backdrops are used for the larger ones. In the Backdrop Settings dialog, you should first select which reference point is used to measure the fall height on the inlet pipe and the outlet pipe. The measurement point can either be the soffit, the center, or the invert of the pipe. In this example, I selected to measure the fall height from the invert of the inlet pipe to the soffit of the outlet pipe. This should generally depend on the standard details or the code of practice you're following in your project. One thing to bear in mind is that infraWizard assumes that the lower pipe of the backdrop is always matched soffit to soffit with the outlet pipe. Therefore, in case you want the fall height to be measured between the upper pipe and the lower pipe of the backdrop itself, like in this standard detail, you should set both measurement points as soffit, and this is the default setting of infraWizard for new networks. The other part of criteria defines the height range for each type of backdrops. infraWizard will compare the fall height to the threshold values defined here. If the fall height exceeds the threshold of vertical backdrop, the connection type will be set as vertical backdrop. If the fall height doesn't exceed the threshold of vertical backdrop, but exceeds the threshold of ramp backdrop, the connection type will be set as ramp backdrop. If the fall height is not exceeding the threshold of ramp backdrop, then the connection will be set to have no backdrop. I'll click OK to apply settings. I'll then go to the plan style to ensure that backdrop annotation is included in the list of displayed pipe annotations. Now you can see that infraWizard has annotated some backdrops. The backdrop annotation shows the backdrop type and the invert level of the lower pipe of the backdrop. If I double-click this node, you'll find the number of backdrop connections indicated in the node properties. And if I double-click the pipe, you'll find the backdrop type included in the pipe properties as well. Remember that infraWizard automatically updates the backdrop type while you're editing your network. For example, if I change the downstream invert of this pipe, the backdrop type will automatically change to none, and the backdrop annotation will consequently disappear. This concludes today's session about the Manage Networks panel. Our next session will be about working with plan styles. See you soon.